Information Morning last week, I spoke with two people from Kings County, and they told us about a couple of dead calves they found near an isolated road there. Since then, CBC has learned a third dead calf was found in that same area last year. In Nova Scotia, the Department of Environment deals with complaints about farm animals. A department spokesperson tells us that because there were no identification tags on the two calves, they would not investigate. Also, they don't send animals for necropsy in cases like this. Our next guests believe more should be done. Camille Labchuk is a lawyer and the executive director of Animal Justice. And Jodi Lazare is an assistant professor who teaches animal law at Dalhousie University's Schulich School of Law. Good morning to you both. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Portia.
Good morning. Thank you.
Camille, first to you. What do you think of the Department of Environment taking this stance on this? What should they do when they get a complaint like this?
What I see in this case is multiple dead bodies of animals accumulating in a place where they're not supposed to be, which indicates to me that there's a problem. And it's only the exclusive job of the Department of Environment to address animal cruelty to farmed animals. No one else has jurisdiction over this. So the fact that they're refusing to investigate this, to me, is very troubling.
And what are the questions that you have about these dead animals?
Well, a number of questions. I mean, first of all, it's not the proper way that farmers are supposed to dispose of dead animals. There's also some question about the fact that they seem to be three very young cows, apparently all male calves. This makes me wonder if they're perhaps byproducts of the dairy industry. So male calves born to female cows who are impregnated so that they will produce milk for humans. Male calves are often considered not very valuable to the dairy industry, and so they're sold for veal sometimes or occasionally just killed. So, again, it raises questions about where these calves came from and why they've been killed and why they've been dumped there.
And Professor Lazare, what do you think should have happened in this situation?
I can't speak to this case directly, but the Department of Environment, like Camille just said, has jurisdiction to look into conditions on farms. They're the only ones who are able to do this. And if it were me, and I were an inspector, or if I worked for the department and I heard about dead cows or dead calves in the woods in farm country, I'd want to know more about that. I might use my legal authority to visit neighboring farms and see what's going on there. Were these calves, were they mistreated? Is there cruelty happening? Is this more, innocent? Is there a farmer around who's having difficulty feeding their animals? There's all kinds of things that could have led to this, and I think that these are important questions that should be asked.
And you mentioned perhaps that inspectors could go and visit neighboring farms or visit farms in the area to ask some questions. Do they have legal authority to follow up in that way?
They do. There's an Animal Protection Act in Nova Scotia that provides that inspectors can inspect and monitor facilities where farm animals are housed and kept. So certainly, I would say they have authority to do that.
Would that actually be effective in this case in finding out who's dumping these dead calves, do you think, Professor Lazare?
Well, I think if this is a trend that's happening on a local farm, knocking on doors and checking out the situation in which animals are housed and fed and kept and raised, I think would be fruitful. Yeah, I mean, the Act gives inspectors the permission to ensure that the industry is treating its animals humanely.
Mm-hmm. And then if they were able to track down where the calves came from, say that did happen and there was an indication that they'd been mistreated, would there be legal tools that they'd have to charge or reprimand the farmer? What would the follow-up be in terms of the law, Professor Lazare?
Well, that really depends. Like I said, the Animal Protection Act governs all animals in Nova Scotia. But regarding the conditions that animals are kept in and certain procedures, performed on different kinds of animals, the rules for farmed animals are very different than they are for companion animals and would probably surprise, I think, many Nova Scotians. So the Act gives the government the power to set out so-called standards of care by regulation, and those would dictate whether conditions are appropriate or not, for things like shelter requirements, food, that kind of thing. They have done this for dogs and cats. There are, I'd say, relatively stringent standards of care for companion animals in Nova Scotia. But for farmed animals, those regulations simply don't exist. So Camille mentioned that there isn't much law around the treatment of farmed animals, and this is a perfect example of that. So said, farmed animal welfare is evaluated according to industry codes of practice written for the most part by industry stakeholders. So it's really the industry governing itself, which means whether, the way that these cows or cows around them are being treated is illegal or not depends on whether it's regular practice in the industry. But I would venture a guess that disposing of calves in the woods is not regular industry practice.
And Camille, bringing it back to you, are there areas that you think the animal welfare laws should be strengthened, just building on what Professor Lazare was saying there?
Yes, absolutely. And as she points out, and we've been discussing, that there just aren't clear standards for the welfare of animals on farms, which is a huge problem. Not only are there no standards, but there's also no proactive inspection. So we don't have a team of inspectors going onto farms all the time to check out the conditions that animals are kept in. It's a complaint-based process. So if somebody phones or writes in and says, I've seen this thing that's very troubling, then they might be able to address it. But I think we need very clear standards and regular proactive inspections to make sure that animals aren't suffering some of the worst abuses on farms.
Do we have the infrastructure for that right now in terms of the number of inspectors, though?
Well, that's a question of where we want as a community and as a public to invest resources in. And I think if you ask the average person, they consider that animals on farms should have good lives. They shouldn't be abused. They shouldn't be subjected to unnecessary suffering. And I do think that that's something that people care enough about that they would like to see government take on that function.
Well, I appreciate the insight you've been able to share with us on this issue raised by people who did make a complaint. Thanks, Jodi. Thank you, Camille.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Portia.
Jodi Lazare is an assistant professor who teaches animal law at Dalhousie University's Schulich School of Law. Camille Labchuk is a lawyer and the executive director of Animal Justice.